Hey Biology, so today we're going to go ahead and talk about chapter 17.2, and that's the evolution of populations, and looking at evolution as genetic change. So each time an organism reproduces, it passes its genes to the next generation. So fitness is successive passing on genes, so making sure that our offspring can then produce viable offspring, so offspring that will then be able to survive and also reproduce. Natural selection on single gene frequencies can lead to changes in allele frequencies and thus to evolution. So we have an example population here of lizards. So we can see that we have brown lizards at a frequency of 80%, red at 10%, and black at 10%. If red lizards are more visible to predators, they might be less likely to survive. We might actually see a flux in allele frequencies, and thus we see evolution occur. Okay, so black lizards, let's say, here's just an example, absorb more heat to warm up faster on cold days, so they can move faster to get food and avoid predators. The allele for black may increase in frequency, and again, if it increases in frequency, then we actually see evolution occur. So when traits are controlled by more than one gene, the effects are more complex, okay? So previously, that was a single gene trait with the lizards. Now this one we have our polygenic trait. So in our polygenic traits, we always show our graphs as a bell curve. The fitness of individuals near each other will not be very different. So fitness of like two, let's say if we were talking about height, the fitness of two short people, they're going to have similar fitnesses than maybe two people that are medium size. And so fitness varies based on where you are in the spectrum, but the closer you are in the entire spectrum, your fitness isn't going to vary. So where fitness varies, natural selection can act. So natural selection can affect the distribution of phenotypes in three different ways, through directional selection, stabilizing selection, and disruptive selection. So in directional selection, we can use Darwin's finches as an example here. So let's say we're talking about beak size. Individuals at one end of the curve are going to have a higher fitness than individuals at another end of the curve. So let's say that Darwin's finches, having a larger beak size is more beneficial because the let's say something happens on an island where larger fruits or larger seeds become more plentiful, and the small beaked birds can't really open them or get to them. And so those with larger beaks that can get to the food are going to be more likely to survive, and thus shifting the graph towards the area of higher fitness. Then we have stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection is when individuals in the center of the curve have a higher fitness. So babies are an example of this. Let's talk about birth mass. So having really low birth mass babies, it's not good, but those are usually the preemie babies that don't usually live as long as normal sized babies. Having really large babies, it might be harder for a mother to actually give birth to a very large baby, thus making the babies in the center, or the more average medium size, the most fit because they are the most likely to survive. Then we have disruptive selection. So individuals at extremes of the curve have higher fitness than individuals in the middle, and it can cause the graph to almost split in two, and the selection creates two distinct phenotypes. So again, if we're talking about Darwin's birds, let's say the middle sized beak or the medium sized beak, for some reason the food isn't there for that finch, and so we either have birds with really large beaks or we have birds with really small beaks, and so the medium-sized individual then becomes less fit, and we see that dip in the curve. So natural selection is not the only source of evolutionary change. Remember, genetics is controlled by probability. The smaller the population, the farther the actual results may be from the predicted outcomes. So in a small population, this random change in allele frequencies is based on chance. It's called genetic drift. So the probability of, let's say, a bug, okay, from a main island being carried over by wind to a smaller island is an example of genetic drift. Basically, we're taking the genes of just this random bug, and it's not being selected for or against, it's just random, and we're placing it somewhere else. That's genetic drift, how some genes can drift to other places. It can occur when a small group of individuals colonize a habitat. So this could also occur with these lizards here. So just by random chance, the lizards could somehow have been moved from one place to the next, and then at that place where they then were moved to, only their genes are going to be seen in that place. So individuals may carry alleles in different relative frequencies than in larger population. The population they found will be different from the parent population because, again, it was random. So genetic drift, make sure you write this down, is due to random chance and not through natural selection. So again, just by chance, it's not through natural selection, it's just random. So an example of genetic drift, we have the founder's effect. So the founder's effect is kind of just like what we said. Whoever is going to find an area, those are the only genes that that area will have. And so we're going to see different frequencies, and we're going to see populations differ because of those different frequencies. So we see that in population A, only the darker colored, the bugs and the yellow bugs moved into that population, and so we're only ever going to see bugs that had those genes there. So you don't see any red bugs in that population A because that's not what the parent population brought over. And then the same can be said about the black bugs in population B. We also have the bottleneck effect, and so sometimes a disaster, so like a natural disaster, can kill off most of a population. And then we see a change in allele frequencies following that dramatic loss of the population. So, you know, say a virus wipes out almost everyone except just a few people. Well, the only alleles that are going to stay within the population are those that survived. And so those are the only alleles then that will actually be able to reproduce, and that's how we're going to see the population. Are there any conditions in which evolution will not occur? Is there a way to tell if this is happening? Well, there is. That's the Hardy-Weinberg principle. And that's what we did with our Teddy Graham lab. So again, if you remember, Hardy and then Weinberg, they basically developed an equation that predicts the relative frequency of alleles in a population based on the frequency of phenotypes in that population. So they were able to look at the phenotypes, so similar to our bears, they looked at either sad bears or happy bears, and then they were able to predict the alleles within that population using their equation, p squared plus 2p cubed plus q squared equals 1. Do you have to know this equation? Absolutely not. Don't worry about memorizing it. But you have to know what makes this equation true. So what allows us to have genetic equilibrium. So basically the principle states that allele frequency in a population will remain constant unless one or more factors cause the frequency to change. So in a situation in which allele frequencies remain constant, so no evolution is occurring, is genetic equilibrium. So there are 5 conditions, and you should have these 5 conditions written down in your notebook for us to maintain genetic equilibrium. So first one must be random mating. You can't choose a mate. If you're choosing a mate, then you're choosing characteristics of that. And if you're choosing a certain characteristic, we are going to see frequencies change in that characteristic. Population must be large, okay? So if a population is large, then any genetic drift in and out of that population won't have a large effect on the allele frequencies. No movement in or out, so we can't have any immigration or emigration. No mutations. Mutations cause variation. Variations cause us to maybe have different fitness levels. And then no natural selection, so something can't be selected for or against. And that's how evolution under these circumstances will not occur because we'll be in genetic equilibrium. So in order for random mating to occur, all members of the population must have equal opportunity to reproduce. In natural populations like lions, wolves, elk, or mountain sheep, members compete or even fight for the opportunity to mate. So it's not random. So in most populations, we're going to see evolution occur. For genetic equilibrium to occur, a population must be large, so genetic drift doesn't cause changes in allele frequency by random chance. No migration can occur since movement in and out of the population changes the frequency of alleles, so we kind of stated that already. So again, for genetic equilibrium to occur, there must be no mutations, which introduce new alleles, and no natural selection can take place, which give any one of the phenotypes a survival advantage. So in some populations, these conditions may be met or nearly met over long periods of times, and then little evolution occurs. But in most populations, it is difficult for all conditions of Hardy-Weinberg to be met. So in most populations, hopefully you will say that they will evolve. Okay, so evolution will happen. That is it for chapter 17.2 notes.